Hello. Today I want to share with you again much of my own life experience, and today I'll be sharing about retaliation during and after separation. I think this aspect is hardly ever talked about. People talk more about the emotional blows to themselves. And so this was an area that I think I was probably hardest hit. So I'm going to share a lot from my own experience in this area. I'm going to start with a quotation today, which I think sums up much of the perspective and the outlook that I had when I was faced with my separation. My children don't need me to save them. My children need to watch me save myself. They are my reasons to be brave. So I think that was a kind of philosophy that just seeped into my psyche during this period. And the other thing I kept saying to myself, you must never come out of this bitter. You must come out of it a better person. So I determined a mindset from day one because I didn't want any poison. That was never going to help me or to help my children. Yes, so let me start with the very petty. So I remember at the time of the separation, I was moving back into the home where we had been a family before. So he had the furniture stored in a particular property, and most of the furniture came back. However, there are certain things that took a little longer, like the fridge. You do without a fridge for maybe another week. Petty stuff like that. Anyway, it eventually came back. The other stuff, whenever you say you're going to do something, you don't do it. You don't show up. As the children got older and they would make more simple demands like, can I come and spend a weekend? They were always promised, but it never happened. Or they asked for a particular item and it may have always been coming, but it never came. So whatever the reasons, that kind of petty stuff became a little burdensome for them sometimes. And it became burdensome for me because the children are looking and asking, why is he not doing? And then here was one, apart from the broken promises, but something that was really striking to me was this blanket view. Oh, you have people who can help you. I don't have anybody. As if the marriage was predicated on my family being the backbone, whether financially or whatever he had in mind. But that was a mantra I heard over and over again. And I was always surprised. Just always gobsmacked, as the Scottish people would say. It never ceased to shock me. And this was something he said repeatedly. But if the petty stuff and the broken promises were the only thing, maybe I wouldn't be speaking about it today. Because I'm sure what I'm going to say today is going to be blessing someone because of just my willingness to share the raw experience that I had, the unembellished experience. So, one of the areas we get retaliation is the financial withdrawal. And I got bludgeoned from that withdrawal. So I shared with you before that at the time I was living in a developing country. And to get redress, the majority of the people would go to what is called the family court. But the family court is a place where baby mother, baby daddy. No, that was not part of my own personal cultural ethos. So nobody would have caught me there. So one of the first issues that confronted me in terms of maintenance of the children was a wrangling over arriving at a figure. Anyway, I had to arrive at a figure that was so subpar that I worked out in my mind mentally, because by now they were now going to primary school. But the school I chose was a fee-paying school. So I had to agree to this really subpar maintenance monthly fee, which did not cover the expenses for food, the expenses for rent, none of the major expenses. But in my mind, it became a trade-off, because what I said, okay, you take care of all the school fees, and that is how the trade-off is going to be. But it was still a hugely unfair trade-off, because you were paying one fee every 3 months, whereas I was paying monthly fees for rent and weekly fees for food and lots of other incidentals that children need on a daily basis. So he definitely had the unfair advantage. Anyway, that persisted, and I tried to cope as best as I could, because it was always about the welfare of my children. And here is what I am going to share. So by the time over a decade had passed, and it was always in my personal plan of personal advancement to go and do graduate studies. So now the opportunity came. I was able to get study leave from my job. I now had 3 children. One was now 5, the other was 13, and the other was 17. So imagine you have one in primary, you have one in high, and one just about to enter post-secondary. An interesting life, I can tell you. Okay, so off I am going to the UK. And you know, there are lots of incidentals that you are going to incur and you need to do before you leave, like taking the children for medical checkups, if they were on medication, to make sure, you know, you have that medication to tide them over. And just the incidentals of anything necessary. They're going to a new country, warm clothing. So let me be blunt. There was just absolutely no inquiry about that. And there was absolutely no contribution. Anyway, before I left, I said to my sister, if you would be kind enough, because my family was still on, you know, talking terms, very civil. We're a very civil family. So I said, if you are able to, give him a call once a month and see if you will be able to collect that little fee. And if you do, you put it in an account, and if and when you come, you can bring whatever it works out to. Well, after she called him maybe 3 times, I remember she came to visit, and she said to me, Clover, I am never ever calling again, because when I call, I feel more sorry for him based on what he's sharing. And this is what struck me, and I will never forget it. He said to her, things are so economically bad with him that his partner is the one who is paying the majority of the bills. Now, I was beyond shocked, and so was she, that anybody would have made themselves, let's use vulnerable to be charitable. But that is where it ended. So the last time my 13-year-old child ever received anything from her dad was when she was then 13, and that was the last time she ever received anything. Okay, so we went, and what was very surprising and just so exciting for me when I went is that there were no school fees where I was in the UK. And my children, they both, because we lived in a general, what I should say, a tourist university town, they were accustomed to foreigners coming and going, minorities, especially from African countries. So my children did fit in, but what was more than exciting to me was there were just no school fees. So whatever the activities were, everything was absolutely free. The only thing I had to do was to buy the uniform, and it was extremely simple with a pullover. So you buy 3 sets and that's fine. So that was very exciting for me. And even travel on the bus was free. They got a bus pass. So I was really uplifted. It just lifted that weight off of me, because here was I worrying. It's like that weight of hassling and haggling with anybody for when the next check is going to come, that just didn't need to exist, because these incidentals were covered by the government. And believe me, it so lightened my burden. And I was more than ecstatic. Relieved. That was probably the best word. And the 5-year-old, there was a little minibus that would come right to the hall of the residence, because I lived in a warden's flat. And they would pick her up and they would bring her back. And this was for a particular age group, so she was covered for a long period of time. So that little baby one now, she came out of a different relationship. And I know you're going to think when I say some of the things that, how could this happen again? Well, don't hold yourself responsible for other people's behavior. Don't hold yourself responsible for people's irresponsibility. Anyway, off we went, and her dad would come and he would visit. But again, there was no regular monthly support. But he did contribute to other responsibilities. What I found striking about him, and I'll never forget this because it came as a culture shock to me, or just a shock of thinking anyway. So when she was born, he said to me he wouldn't contribute to things like rent because she was so tiny, she wasn't taking up any space. And for me to remember this with such accuracy, you can imagine how shocking this was. It was real cognitive dissonance just swirling around in my head. But then I had already come to terms in life about not getting into combat with anybody, because my peace of mind and my struggle to move to better as a human being was more important than anything negative that anyone could do. That was my mantra, and I was going to keep it because I needed to be a whole person for my children. Another thing I found interesting was when we were leaving to go on that plane, there was not even a stipend to say, okay, you all need to get breakfast when you get off the plane, since it was a 9-hour journey. And that didn't happen when we were going, and that didn't happen when we were returning. Something I still find shocking to this day. And maybe that's why I'm speaking up, so that other people will not hold themselves responsibilities for these deficits from co-parents and from partners and from parents. You can only hold yourself accountable for what you do. These are flaws and deficits in other people. However, here is what I will say. I did not manage to exercise the level of accountability that I should have from a financial standpoint. And yes, again, I'm telling you, I was financially bludgeoned. And it's not peculiar to me, and it's not peculiar to people necessarily from my age group. Because I'm not one of these people who believe that motherhood is synonymous with suffering. But based on the overall circumstances of my life at the time, my focus was on overcoming and becoming a whole person. It doesn't mean this mentality doesn't exist, because I have seen, again, in the family circle, and this is 11 years ago, that in order to get compliance for the dad to take the child on a regular basis, he refused to comply unless the money he was ordered to pay was dropped to a certain amount. And this is in a developed country where they mandate the amount, and if necessary, it's taken at the source. And what this mother had to do, she had to return a portion of this every month just to ensure that the dad would take the child every weekend to ensure consistency and continuity for the child. Because there were some months where he wouldn't come and pick the child up at all. So can you imagine a parent, a mother, having to negotiate under the table and returning money just to get the father to honor his responsibility of co-parenting? So, nothing is new under the sun, but we all need to be wiser. And I am encouraging any mother or father, because this is not a gender issue. I had a brother whose wife left him with 3 children when they were all in high school, and there was no financial contribution coming. I don't know if any ever came. So these are ongoing issues, but we need to be vigilant. We need to find ways to hold our partners accountable, to continue to ensure that they show up physically and that they provide financially. Too many of us have accepted that disproportionate burden, and it's not even about fairness. It is about honoring a responsibility that you agreed to. So, my point today, I had probably no intention of sharing with this depth of honesty. But I think God has laid it on my heart as an overcomer to encourage someone or others who may be struggling with this issue and coiling up in a corner and wondering why they have to bear a disproportionate burden. You shouldn't and you mustn't. And when it came for my children to go to university, that issue was pretty much the same. Student loans and mom. Student loans and mom. Because by now your children are adults or young adults, and there is just a limit to how much emotional exposure in a battle you can allow your children to absorb. That's one thing I have learned. you have to put a limit on the amount of absorption, right? Because you don't want to move them in a direction beyond optimal emotional competence. We owe it to our children to support them right through until, as my mother would say, they are standing firm on their own 2 feet. So these financial issues are real. I have known people who have lost homes after the husband has left. People who have lost cars. Their economic standing plummets. And this is just not acceptable. It should be a process of negotiation, because the people who are ultimately affected are the children of both parties. And if the family begin to take an economic decline, it affects the emotional wellness of the custodial parent and the ability of that custodial parent to deliver optimal care to the family, especially the children, who, as I said at the beginning, they are the core, they are the new centerpiece of this relationship. So I just wanted to say to anyone today who is going through this process, press on. Do not take your foot off the gas. You should not have more sympathy for the other person than yourself. You should enforce whatever needs to be enforced. If it is a case where you can get annual increases, you should, and you should carry no guilt for it. Again, in my own family circle, I see someone who has forfeited that completely and is going to accept the same monthly upkeep from age 1 to age 18. Can you imagine? And we all know how costs will increase in those years. While these decisions are personal, we must hold people accountable. So, I just wanted to lay that on somebody's heart today, that everyone is responsible for the 100%. And this business of having a disproportionate demand on one parent is just not acceptable. That was my story, but it should not be your story. So, take action now.